There is huge suppression of our freedom of being able to be inquisitive and get things wrong. We're in school, we're being judged by the norm, if you want. We've got to reach certain targets, and by our peers. We're not allowed to follow our own suit, our own natural progression. And unfortunately, that way of judging other people is still carried on in most businesses nowadays as well. There's a certain expectation we have to live up to, and that is a completely created expectation that doesn't actually exist. But we're afraid of showing our failures. We're ashamed almost of showing that we're on a learning curve, that we haven't got it all yet, for being judged against Mr. or Mrs. or Miss Perfect. But that person doesn't exist.
What makes us limit ourselves and decide that we shouldn't try new things? I think this is an episode that everybody's going to be able to relate to. Hi everyone, I'm Carla Johnson. And when did we start to become ashamed of our ideas? When did we start to suppress them? When did we decide that they were wrong? That's exactly what we're going to cover on this episode of Connect the Dots. Connect the Dots is where we dig into the process that the world's most successful innovators use to actually connect those dots between what it is that inspires them, the work that they do, and how they actually put it all into play in companies of all sizes, of all industries, of all ages, of all types, in all places of the world. Today, I'm delighted to have with me Kate Strong, a world champion athlete, a plant-based adventurer, a philanthropist, an entrepreneur, and oh so much more. Kate helps people redefine what's possible. Kate, welcome to the show today.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Carla, and it's great to be here.
Now, we were talking just a minute ago. I'm in Denver, Colorado, and this is our second day of gray, cloudy weather, which Coloradoans don't do very well with because we're used to 320 days of sun. But this is typical for you in London, right?
Yep, definitely. Weather is predictably unpredictable where I am, and also quite unexciting.
Yeah. It's kind of a typical weather forecast. What's it like today? Oh, gray and gloomy. And
it's actually sunny, but it's very, very cold. So I have been outside and my cheeks just flushed red, and I've come back indoors to the warmth.
Now, I know London as the stereotypical kind of gray city, and both times that I've been there, the first time I went there, it was record-breaking heat and sun, and I went to London and got sunburned. And the second time I went, it wasn't record-breaking heat, but it was sunny all the time. So I'm starting to think maybe it's not quite as gray as people lead, and maybe that's a campaign to keep London to themselves, but it's a beautiful, beautiful city.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I lived in Australia for 9 years. When I came back, it took me well over a year to take my jumper off. So I'm still getting surprised.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about that transition, because by education, you're an engineer, right?
Yeah, mechanical engineering.
And so how did you go from mechanical engineering into taking off and moving to Australia, and your grand adventures there with being a restaurant owner?
Gosh, it's amazing when we look back at our lives, because I can never join the dots looking forward, as Steve Jobs said. I studied mechanical engineering. I was a double master's in engineering, so studied that for 5 years in France and England. But I think in my heart of hearts, I was never suited to that high tolerance, high male environment as well. So I had a bit of a free spirit. So when I was given the opportunity with my then partner to move to Australia and start my own business, I just jumped at it. And I didn't want to go back to school to study. So finding a hospitality business seemed the most appropriate to learn on the job. I think when we learn from an experience hypothetically through research or through reading a book or studying online, it's not necessarily the same as when we learn in our lives. So, when the balance sheet was showing a negative and it was my money, I learned a heck of a lot quicker than if I was doing that in school. So that's how I got into hospitality. For me, it was the quickest entry to starting my own businesses.
Now, that's an interesting topic about learning on the job, like literally learning on the job. I I also come from an engineering background. In university, I studied electrical engineering for 2 years. And it came because I'm the youngest of 5 kids, and all of my 4 older siblings were either engineers, military people, a lawyer, very left brain oriented people. And I just assumed, well, then that's the path that I would take too, because I'm good at math and I'm good at science. And sometimes I think we fool ourselves by thinking what we're good at is what we like. And a couple of years into university, it was really clear I wasn't good at studying engineering because I didn't actually like it. And I made a shift, and I ended up later with a master's in history. But I think there's a lot that you can pull from those early experiences that you have. And I'm sure that there was a lot that you brought into the hospitality world that drew on your engineering background that made a big difference in how you approach that work. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, very true. And I wish I studied in the States, because in Britain, when you choose a topic, you've got to see it through to the end. So once I chose engineering, I was pretty much locked in there for 5 years unless I'd start again. So I did fulfill it, and as I said, get a double master's. But yeah, I mean, I think anyone looking from an outsider's perspective or a different point of view is a fresh way of producing different results. So if we've all been taught, just using accounting as an example, that there's one way of working out how to make sure our cash flow is positive, then that's the only way we're looking for. If we brought in someone who wasn't trained in accounts but was great with numbers, they might create a wholly new and innovative way of doing finances that generates a higher profitability and less cost. So me coming into hospitality from an engineering perspective, and without having had any hospitality experience apart from the occasional waitressing job, I was able to sort of deconstruct a hospitality business in a way that no one had done that before, because they'd all been taught the same methods. So yeah, I was able to, like, my first business was actually a Subway franchise. And I think within the first year, I was the highest turnover increase of all the stores in Subway, which is massive. And that's pretty much the award you want. It means you're making more money. So I was only able to do that by coming from a different perspective from other hospitality industries. But this is translatable everywhere in life, so it's great to look at things from a what else or how else could we be doing it.
And I think you've done a beautiful job of being able to take your background and experience. And I imagine there's plenty of things from hospitality that you've pulled forward in the work that you do now. And I know I've been guilty of this. And again, it comes from growing up, following siblings who were very methodical, research oriented, is that I tend to think I can't start to do something until I know everything about it. I over research. I overthink, I over investigate, I over plan, I over engineer everything. And it comes to a point where I can find myself being paralyzed. And it's if it's something that has meaning to me, I eventually get to that point where I just pull the ripcord, pull it, jump out of the plane and just get going and figure it out as you go along. How do you see that? Not only in your own work with what you've done in the past, but how do you see that with the people that you work with in your business now? And maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the work that you do with people.
Yeah, sure. And you're saying exactly how I feel as well. And we forget that life doesn't reward people who are perfect. They reward people who are in action. We don't need to be 100% on top of the game, and we'll never be there because we're always evolving. And I'm working with a client at the moment on their value proposition. And he said to me, it's not 100%. And I said, as long as it's 75%, go out, because the rest of it will be through conversation that we can create that. So I struggle with perfection paralysis and wanting to know more of a topic before starting. But if we break it down to the fundamentals of, as a child, we don't tell children they can't go to a math class because they don't know how to add. We say they'll learn it in the class. Why can't we do that with ourselves when we're starting a business or starting a new role? I think it comes down to owning that we don't know as well. In the Western society, in Britain in particular, putting our hand up and saying, I don't know, is almost shameful. We can't do that. but that's the only way we can actually expand our knowledge. And we don't have to work in isolation. We can find someone who does and work together. So I'd love the world, and this is something that I'm learning to embrace in my own personal journey, to own the areas I don't know, to either research or skill up, but not use them as excuses to stop. So that's what I'm doing in my life, and that's what I'm hopefully implanting on with my clients as well.
You have, there's a talk, a TEDx talk that I heard you give that I thought was phenomenal in how the difference in how we talk to ourselves as adults versus how we look at children and their process of learning. And when a child starts out learning to walk, you know, they try to stand up and fall down, try and stand up and fall down. And maybe they take a few of those first tentative steps, and we're all here going, yay, way to go. And you're cheering the progress. And I think there's a big difference between the destination and honoring and celebrating the progress. But we also don't look at that child after they've fallen down 2, 3, 4, 5 times and say, you know what, they're just not a walker. You know, just give up. You know, and I've had friends who actually didn't start to talk until they were 3 or 4 years old. And nobody ever said, well, they're just not going to talk the rest of their life, you know, move on and do something else.
Right.
What do you think happens to people between how we look at children or how we're willing to try and, you know, as kids, we don't think we failed. We're just like, oh, that didn't work out quite the way I expected. Let me try again. You know, what happens to us from the time we're young until we're adults and know better, that we stop trying and we stop understanding that it's just kind of trial and error rather than true failure?
God, that's a really powerful question, and we could talk about it for years and not get to the answer. I see 2 prongs. One is society and the environment we live within. There is huge suppression of our freedom of being able to be inquisitive and get things wrong. We're in school, we're being judged by the norm, if you want. We've got to reach certain targets, and by our peers. We're not allowed to follow our own suit, our own natural progression. And unfortunately, that way of judging other people is still carried on in most businesses nowadays as well. There's a certain expectation we have to live up to, and that is a completely created expectation that doesn't actually exist. But we're afraid of showing our failures. We're ashamed almost of showing that we're on a learning curve, that we haven't got it all yet, for being judged against Mr. or Mrs. or Miss Perfect. But that person doesn't exist. And then the other side of it is ourselves as well. I think, again, I'm only talking from my own experience and the few people I've delved into this through clients, is we're disconnected from ourselves as being on a learning journey. Like today is the youngest I'll ever be, but also I'll never be older than this very moment in this very time either. So I can't expect to know what I'll know in 3 years' time, but I'm still beating myself up about it today, because that's what we do. We judge ourselves on where we should be, though that's a fictitious line. So something I've done, it sounds quite woo-woo, but it did work quite well for me, is when I was a world champion, I had a huge expectation of what I should be doing and shouldn't, which it actually prevented me from learning, because I was ashamed of my learning progress, because I should have already been at the top of it. So I got a photograph of myself when I was younger, 2 or 3 years old. And anytime I heard in my voice that beating myself up, I'd look at that little girl and go, would I say the same to her? And I started to reconnect to myself as that girl, still on her learning journey, just with a few more wrinkles and maybe a few grey hairs as well.
You know, that's a beautiful, beautiful kind of way to think about it. And I also have a picture of myself. I'm probably about 2. And I'm sitting on the front steps of the little farmhouse that I grew up in. And I have a Kleenex in this hand, and I have an Oreo cookie in the other hand, kind of a, you know, shapeless little top, the little, you know, weird white leather shoes that had probably been passed down from my siblings. And when we look at ourselves in that way, we have a lot more compassion toward what we do, and significantly less judgment. And it makes me sad when I talk to people about, you know, here's what you can think about, you know, this, or this, and maybe you could start to, you know, connect the dots in this way and look at outcomes differently, or look at what's possible much differently. And I can see it in their body language first, their eyes, they might, pull back a little bit, or if it's on the phone, it gets real quiet on the other side. But essentially what they're saying is like stop. I could never do that. How do people deal with that kind of self-perceived limits and really self implemented ceilings about what they believe is possible?
Well, it's interesting. And again, I love these topics, and I love talking about them with you, Carla, because you're really sort of challenging me as well, which is great. The first thing is, when did we start taking life and business so significantly? There is only one way we're going to terminate this life, and I'm doing my best to delay that outcome and that only solution as much as possible. And between then and now, it's about having as much experience, as much fun as possible. So if ever I catch myself or my clients feeling that pressure, I remind us, albeit joyously, that we don't want the significance just yet. That can take as long as it wants. And to add curiosity into our life, like as I said at the beginning, how else can we do things? Take a walk we've done 100 times and see something new. That's a challenge or an invitation I usually start these people on. Because if we can't find curiosity in the now, we're not going to find out where that glass ceiling is in place and also how to remove it. So I like to feel that discomfort. I like to feel that challenge and that resistance in myself, because it means that I'm growing. We can't expect growing without pain. So that's the same for muscles. That's the same for our minds. That's the same for our dreams and visions as well. So for people who want to start expanding their potentiality, or 10xing their business, or taking their health to a new level, or climbing Everest, or whatever that may be, or relationships, we need to start in the moment and finding that curiosity and start embracing that discomfort. It'll never go away. Success is not a destination. You can't just fly like you can to Hawaii and sit on success still. You need to work on it every single day. And that involves getting comfortable with uncomfortability.
And that's such a great point about the comfort with discomfort. And I know, like for me, some of the most significant and important things that I've ever done in my life have put me considerably out of my comfort zone. I think about quitting my job and going back to get my master's full time. And I had a great career that I liked, but it was just something that I felt inside of me that if I didn't do it, I would always regret. I look at the times my husband and I quit our jobs and we took a year to backpack around South America, again, during some prime times in our career. A couple of years before the pandemic, my husband and I and our 3 kids, they were all in middle school and high school then, left to move to Spain for a year just to try that experience. And, now, especially in hindsight, it couldn't have been a more significant experience for us. And I think curiosity has really fueled that. And it's something within us. And you talked about it a little bit, about even something as simple as going out and taking a walk and doing it with curiosity can change a person's entire perspective of how they look at their day. Because I remember reading something about the difference in how you travel. If you travel by airplane, you never see the granularity of if you walk down the street and then you see, like the gravel in the gutter, and you see the chip paint on the crosswalk, and you hear the birds, and it's such a different experience. And how we have to start to look at how we can nurture that curiosity, because that really is what helps us see the world around us and become more inspired and be able to connect those dots into some of the other work that we're doing. And I think for you, I imagine curiosity has been a big part of how you've been able to set these significant world records. I imagine part of it is you're curious about whether or not you can do it.
Yeah, totally. My current one, as you know, next year is a world's first. I want to cycle coast to coast of America in Race Across America, which is 3,000 miles on a bike, then swim the English Channel, and then summit Everest. And I have no idea if physiologically I can do that, or all the other components that I need to put in place. But it's that element of surprise that I'm keeping myself on my toes and removing that glass ceiling, as we talked about. I need to aim for the stars to find out if I can reach them, but I know for a fact I won't if I never aim for them. So I always aim to be the best, not to have the gold medals or the world records, but to find out what my best looks like. And that's what really keeps me on my toes and enjoying today, because I'm bringing my best today. I don't care about tomorrow yet because it's not here, but it's about me bringing my best every single day by having those big goals. Keeps me accountable.
And I was thinking about some of these phenomenal physical feats that you've done. And I am starting to train for an 18-mile trail run in Utah at the end of May, 30 kilometers. And it's the second one I've done. The last one I did was about 4 years ago. And it's almost, and I haven't run, the last 4 years, I haven't run like I had before the previous one. So now it's a different kind of curiosity about how I train, how my body responds, being 4 years older. This last year of not being out and hiking and biking and doing things like I normally would, a curiosity of how I train now, can I use the same kind of training program and things like that. And I think that ability to push and, like you said, not focus so much on the outcome, but curiosity about how we can respond and what it can look like.
Yeah, totally. And what, I love that, and well done for you, because most people would have used the pandemic as an excuse, and you've used it as a reason to still do it. But, we can apply that immediately in business. The business model or the business plan we have from 4 years ago, it might not be some of those components we can't implement today for certain reasons. So it's that agility, it's that curiosity of how else can we do this? What else can we switch in and out? And I think that's applicable for every element, because for your running, we can also look at your health and your sleep and your cycles to apply that. So yeah, it's really refreshing to hear that. And yeah, curiosity will get you to the end, most definitely.
Yes. And I think we talked about this just a little bit before we started today, but there's a book I'm reading called The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. And I love this book because the premise behind it is, like you see the fish jumping from the little bowl to the big one, how we jump from what we believe about ourselves now into these bigger feats. And I know for me, getting to this kind of a distance and this kind of a run, years ago, I thought, I wonder if I could ever do a 5K. And I did it. I survived. I lived. I got up the next day, and it was that internal feeling that just kept me going. And I think that that experience, but I think it's very easy to talk ourselves out of things. In you as an athlete, I imagine it would be incredibly easy to just one day talk yourself out of a workout. One day turns to 2 days, 2 days turns to 3 days. And then all of a sudden you're not on that path to trying to set the records that you've done. How do you maintain that kind of vision of the kind of person you can be from where you are now to take that big leap into these extraordinary things that you've done?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good question. I'm going to use the channel swim as an example, because that's the scariest bit for me. So it's 21 miles minimum in, I don't know what it is in centigrade. It's 18 degrees centigrade water. So it's pretty cold and I can't wear a wetsuit. So I'm quite nervous about the thought of being in water for 12 hours, swimming for 21 miles. If I did it today, I don't think I'd survive. I don't think I'd be able to do it. So for one, I need to have that goal that's in my stretch zone. I'm going to use these, I know these are cliche words, but I don't want to feel overwhelmed and absolutely panicked by it. It's in a year and a half's time. I've got enough time to be able to implement a plan to get me to there. And I need a bigger why. The reason why, well, I can't swim at the moment, all my pools are closed. But the reason why I have a swim coach, the reason why next month we've got it scheduled already, is so that I know that I'm doing my best, that I'm here championing diversity and inclusion in sport and also in business. And that keeps me motivated every single day. And the thought process is, I don't need to swim 21 miles today. I don't need to run a multiple 8 or 9 figure business today and have the leadership qualities of that. I need to be able to swim 14K or manage a 6-figure business, and the skills will come at the right time. So I do my best not to overwhelm myself with where I need to be in the future or who I need to be then, and focus on just doing today. And the second aspect is, if I miss, and I do miss training sessions, I don't beat myself up about it. I don't carry that guilt into tomorrow, which will then contaminate and ruin it. Every action or inaction has a consequence, and I just need to be with that consequence. If I keep missing them, the consequence is my goal will need to be shortened. And that's the only consequence. I'm not a bad girl. I'm not shameful, or I'm not embarrassing. I'm just not going to achieve that size of goal, and I need to taper my dreams. I don't want to do that. So I'm not making sure my consequences are minimized.
Now, you definitely, there's a fair amount of knowledge that's involved with the things that you're going to do. Like that's just known. You're not going to learn how to swim the English Channel in that kind of temperature without a fair amount of knowledge of technique and strokes and pacing and things like that. But you talk about why imagination ultimately is more important than knowledge. Why do you say that?
We can outsource our knowledge. I don't need to know everything. There's a lot that I do that I still don't know what I'm doing. But if I can't imagine me doing it, there's absolutely no chance that I'll believe it and implement it with action. I'm sure if we look at our own lives, have you ever thought this will never work? And we've gone into it begrudgingly, and guess what? One, we haven't enjoyed the path. Two, probably it hasn't worked, but that's most probably because of our attitude towards it. So I need to believe that it's possible in order to put the action in, and 100% with that enthusiasm and curiosity about if I can from day one. But yeah, I can always outsource my knowledge. I don't know why I eat what I eat most of the time. My nutritionist tells me. I don't know what the plan is for me to be able to cycle with a team of 10 following me and supporting me. I've outsourced that to my crew chief. So knowledge is definitely outsourceable, but I can't do it without me believing it's possible. And that's where the belief comes in the first place.
So how do you, I think that's a fabulous aspect about your ability to imagine what this will look like. And I know visioning is really important in sports, to see yourself across a line, to see yourself succeeding riding across a continent. But I think it's something that doesn't always get its due course in the business world. How important do you see people's ability to use their imagination, to see them in a way, to see themselves successful in something just as simple as a hard conversation to have, so they don't go into the conversation like already tensed up and angry, and that ability to see a different outcome so that they eventually see themselves as a different kind of person. I think the person that they always hope to be in their heart, but maybe they've let outside forces and society and corporate culture and things like that turn them into something that they know isn't truly them, and they're not able to bring that true self to their work. You know, how does visioning and imagination play a role in all of that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and quite valid, because in sports we can see the finish line, we can physically walk across a finishing line, or to the top of the mountain, or whatever that may be. But in business, it isn't as clear, because most probably we're sitting on a Zoom call or in front of a desk, and the visioning is a little bland at best. So what I do, and what I also offer to my clients, is imagine the outcome through emotion. How would you like to feel? How would you like the other person to feel or experience at the end of it? What would that person say if they were to leave the room? Would they say that that was a confrontational and cold and awkward conversation? Or what words would you prefer them to use, such as heartfelt, clear, professional? So focusing on the emotive aspects, we can vision that too. Because then the question comes down to, well, what would I be doing if I wanted to be professional? What would I be doing if I needed to be clear? And that might be to have an awkward conversation, but we can still make sure we honor those emotions and the outcome that we want, albeit it's the intangible words. So for me, it's immensely important in all of our lives, including relationships, to make sure that we focus on that outcome and vision it. But it doesn't have to be that physical, tangible doing vision, but it can be that emotional driven outcome as well.
Well, and I think that's really good, because as we look, especially during this last year where we're doing so much work, just like you and I are right now talking on Zoom. And I think there's a lot that's lost in our interpersonal communication by not being able to see the whole person physically, and not being able to kind of tap into the energy of another person, because a lot of it is lost in this kind of environment. And bringing more empathy and compassion to the kind of conversations that we have. But at the same time, a lot of people are under an incredible amount of pressure, different kind of deadlines, different kind of work, still very short deadlines. And it can feel difficult to try and take the time and say, okay, how am I going to go into this call so that I can be more empathetic? But I think the ability to just take 5 minutes and set that space before we have these conversations is so important. That has a much bigger payoff than we realize, or I think give it credit for in the bigger picture.
Yeah. World champions aren't made at the finish line. They're made in the 5 minutes that you give that other people don't every single day. It's the accumulation of those 5 minutes that makes the champions and the winners and the success or whatever else we're attracted to. It's not that one day or that one race. It's those hundreds of hours that we don't see in the background that we make the effort to be that extra X, compassionate, dedicated, committed, whatever that may be.
Yeah, that's the little micro moments that we don't think about. I mean, you're right. We look at the huge champion crossing the finish line or finishing the whatever, and that's what we see. That's what we see as a success. Yeah. Now, let's talk a little bit about limits, mental limits, ceilings. Do you feel that you have a ceiling?
I'd be highly surprised if I didn't. I do my best not to find it.
And so how do you function in order to not, continually bump up against a ceiling? How do you live live a life without limits, as you talk about?
I set a goal that scares me, that's outside of my reach. So using the physical example, I've never climbed Everest. I couldn't imagine a scarier mountain at this stage. And there's a lot to go, like, how am I going to get to Nepal and qualify? You have to do walks and beforehand. So there's a lot of questions around that. So I make sure that the goals I set are 2 or 3 stages away from where I'm actually at. So if I can climb a mountain at 4,000 meters, aim for one that's 15,000 meters. And if I find it paralyzes me and I'm losing sleep for weeks on end, I do roll it back a little bit. So in business, I've got a certain financial target that I want to reach that is 5 times higher than where I am. And I'll set up the structure to support me through there because it keeps me hungry. And I make sure that I never get complacent. So if I find that I'm getting, I'll give you an example of a red flag when I know that my goal is too low. So last year when lockdown first happened, I started to complain about the toilet seat being up. And that was a red flag for me to say, my goal is way too slow. If my life is worth complaining about the toilet seat, I need a bigger goal. So I look for these little examples of, of whinges, of the valid complaints. But if my time is being taken up on these small things in my life, I need to get a goal that scares me because those things won't be anywhere in my sphere of thinking anymore.
Well, and that's hilarious. Like, that's a hilarious indication. And I'm going to think about that now with toilet seats. But I think it's those little irritations because I believe there's a huge part of us inside that says we want to do extraordinary things with our life. And we have these urges, whether it's, walking down the street or in a meeting at work or whatever, that we want to push for something bigger, better, that makes our heart sing. But pretty quickly we talk ourselves out of that. And you had an extraordinary January. And I look at mine and I'm thinking, well, I did pretty good because it was dry January and I made it. For some people, that's awesome. And I look at my workouts and I look at all of the things that I really pushed forward in January. But you had a big goal this January. Can you talk a little bit about it and how it turned out?
Sure. So January 2020, I set the goal of setting a world record in January 2021, which would be a world's first. So it was the furthest distance cycled on a static bicycle in 24 hours by a female. So no females ever attempted that. So for 12 whole months, I've been luckily cycling indoors because I couldn't go out anyway, training for this 24-hour attempt. And 2 days before my record, so all of that training, all of that mindset, I've got a team of 15, we're all geared up, we've got the venue, we're going to live stream it to thousands of people. 2 days before the event, the Prime Minister of the UK announces national lockdown with immediate effect. I can't do it. So to say I'm disappointed would be a huge understatement. I felt I was letting down my sponsors, I was letting down my team, my support crew, and also, to be honest, slight relief, because I didn't have to find out if I was going to be able to do this or not, because there's a lot of pressure, there was a lot of eyes on me. So yeah, I was disappointed and then relieved and then embarrassed and a lot of emotions. So my 24-hour record, I could have easily just sat on the sofa, started to drink alcohol again because I'd given that up in anticipation of this event and celebrated a failed attempt, but it was nothing to do with my faults. But I decided that I didn't want to do that. I wanted to honor the 12 hours anyway. I think it's important to remember that we're not defined by the gold medals. We're defined by the how we react and respond to what's outside of our control. So I attempted a 1-hour record instead. So my partner and I dragged my bicycle outside, put it in the garden. We asked some neighbours to witness through their lounge windows, so we were still kept socially distant and honouring the rules. And in sub-zero temperatures, I attempted a 1-hour world record, and I'm still waiting for Guinness to confirm it, but I did break the record by 2 hours. 2 miles. So possibly I'm a world record holder there, but it was a very far distance, very different to what I thought I'd be doing. And I don't want to say disappointing, but it was like taking a marathon runner and saying you got to run a sprint. But I learned so much about myself in that 1 hour that I'm really proud of myself for doing that. But it was managing a lot of emotions along the way.
Well, and it kind of comes to a second aspect that you talk about. I mean, the first one was aim big. And I talk about go big or go home. You have to set those goals high to the point that they scare you. I know I have goals that make me a little nauseous, and I have absolutely no idea how I'm going to do them, but I figure I'll figure it out. You can outsource knowledge. There's lots of people who can help as long as I keep that imagination and that vision in front of me. But the second thing that you talk about is to go really broad with your goals, so you have leniency and lateral movement in how you accomplish them. And it sounds like that's a little bit of what you put into play with your January goal.
Yeah, totally. It was about celebrating the 12 months of commitment. And what was amazing was, my sponsors had paid for 24-hour event. Every single one of them said, this was amazing. We couldn't ask for more. But, and in my mind, I was going, but I let you down. It wasn't 24 hours. And they went, you've given us more than we could imagine, because there was lessons in the failure. There was lessons in that.
That just gave me goosebumps about the lessons in the failure.
It's true. Yeah. I think we learned so much more. I'd love more people to honor the mistakes, the darkness, the shadow, the challenges we face when we've actually not done what we wanted to do. That's the path of humanity, not, little Miss Perfect with the gold medals. It's about all the mistakes along the time as well. So yeah, happy to share my mistakes anytime you want.
I love it. I love it. And I think it takes a lot of vulnerability to talk about how it turned out like you did. And it can be success, but also still that fair amount of disappointment. And like you said, maybe a little bit of an embarrassment that it didn't turn out like you hoped. This, Kate, has been phenomenal. I so appreciate you spending time with me today. And I have just one last question for you. And this is, who do you find extraordinary and why?
That's an amazing question. I find it's my mission to find extraordinary in every person I meet. So I wouldn't like to call one person out, because everyone I meet has lived 24 hours every single day in an experience I'll never experience. And if I can't find extraordinary in the shopkeeper, the mother I bump into with her children, or the CEO I'm speaking to, if I can't find extraordinary in their journey, then I'm not doing their life a service, and I'm missing out on that. So it's my mission to find extraordinary in every person I meet.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much. This has been phenomenal. It's been wonderful, wonderful. And I appreciate you spending time with us here today.
It's been my pleasure too, Carla, anytime. And thanks so much.